Wanted to take this time to really talk about the death of Andre Braugher. As you know, this week, Andre Braugher passed away at the age of 61. Um, Many of you may not know of him if you're from a younger generation, but I remember Andre Braugher on television mainly because I grew up watching Homicide: Life on the Street, and I also grew up watching um, Glory, which is one of his first movies that he ever played in. Um, his death is very significant this year because I feel like you know, Andre Brower is not talked about as much in terms of the impact he had on television at the time in the early 90s with his character Frank Pembleton. Um I did a I did a video a long time ago talking about the cultural impact of cop dramas. I did that video I believe 2 years ago, and I talked about the impact of cop dramas in the 90s. And one of the cop dramas that two of the cop dramas that really stood out in the 90s were NYPD Blue and also New York Undercover. But most of the times, you never hear anybody talk about Homicide: Life on the Street that much. And Homicide: Life on the Street kind of preceded The Wire. And in my opinion, I thought that, despite anybody's opinion, I thought that Homicide: Life on the Street was one of those shows that was way better than The Wire in terms of its development. Because when you think about David Simon's writing and the character development, there was more character development on Homicide: Life on the Street than it was on The Wire. The Wire, the character was the city. In Homicide: Life on the Street, the cops were the primary characters of the show, along with the murders that were committed on the show. So when we think about a lot of standouts, Frank Pembleton was one of those characters that Andre Brower really he kind of melded into it, and it kind of became who he was in a sense. I don't think anybody could think of a character outside of the character that Andre Brower played. Just like you can't think of Dennis Franz outside of Andy Sipowicz, or um, Donald Draper outside of John Hamm. In a sense, he was a very important character on television. And, people don't talk about Homicide: Life on the Street and its impact because in 1993, when the first season came out, it had one of the highest ratings of all time for a series. And the show ran all the way over in, well, it ran on the same time that the 1993 Super Bowl ran, you know. And it was one of those shows that, you know, it had so much, but when when the episodes came out, there was something about Pembleton that people people really didn't think. It just, to me, it was just one of those great cop shows that never gets discussed. And I feel a certain reason why I needed to bring the show up, because you know it was just one of those episodes that people just, they just didn't didn't talk about, you know. And the episode where he's in an interrogation room for an hour, it was considered back then, especially for NBC, one of the greatest hours of television ever, because people weren't watching the Super Bowl. People weren't watching the Super Bowl. They were watching Homicide. The Pembleton character that Andre Braugher played, he established himself in that realm of great cop leads, basically, of great cop characters, because of the interrogation room. And it seemed like there was a sense of a Shakespearean element to how Andre Braugher brought the Pembleton character to life. He had this level of intellect in how to get to a killer's mind. And it was something very fascinating about that. He wasn't Andy Sipowicz in a sense. He didn't have to smack a suspect around, but he was able to get in the mindset of the suspect. And that was what was so beautiful about that show. A lot of cop dramas don't get talked about, don't get discussed, because there was so many cop dramas in the 90s. And you can't forget, the standouts, which was NYPD Blue, Law and Order, New York Undercover, which was the latter. But out of all those shows, most of the time, Law and Order kind of overshadows Homicide: Life on the Street. But the character, the reason why Homicide: Life on the Street stayed on for so long was because of the Andre Braugher character, was because of Andre Braugher's character. And once he walked away, the ratings went down after 1997. So that to me was one of the primary reasons why I said that, that Pembleton was one of the greatest characters in a cop drama. Brower brought a Shakespearean element to that character that most people, if you're not real cerebral in a sense, would understand. But out of all of that, Mr. Brower left a legacy behind, and he was really consummate professional in the acting industry, in a sense. So he will be dearly missed, and hopefully people will respect his legacy and acknowledge the weight that he carried with the characters that he played. Hopefully, trying to acknowledge how important his character was that rarely gets talked about in pop culture or in the media, really, for that matter. But of course, so many things in the media tend to overshadow that. Now, but rest in peace. This has been a broadcast of Media Talks TV.